Hi guys, today I'm going to talk about how we hatch chicks and how we break all the rules doing it but still get a high hatch rate. I know there's a lot of information online about how temperamental hatching chicks can be and how you have to do everything just right, have the perfect temperatures, perfect humidity, and I'm here to tell you that that's just not true. There's a lot of wiggle room when it comes to hatching chicks, and I've learned this just by observing my hens when they're sitting on a clutch and hatching out chicks. One of the main things I've noticed with my hens is when they do decide to sit on a clutch, I notice that sometimes they'll leave their clutch for an hour at a time and they'll wander around in free range and do whatever the heck they want for about an hour, and then they'll go back to their clutch, and they always have a high hatch rate. One thing I am a stickler about is making sure that the egg turner is always working. I think it's really important that the eggs are turned often. That's just something that I've observed with my hens, is they're constantly turning their eggs. But it's not like they need to be completely turned all the way around. They could just move the slightest bit, and that's enough to keep the eggs viable and to keep the chick from attaching to the inside of the shell, like becoming stuck in the egg. So they really only just need to move a teeny bit throughout the day. And that's why you'll see in my incubator, I stack the eggs, some extra eggs on top of the eggs that are in the little grooves in the incubator, because I'll be able to hatch twice as many eggs this way, and they turn just enough to keep the chick viable, and they don't have any issues hatching. I also have a little system for checking my eggs to make sure that they are viable. After about 5 or 7 days, I will candle the eggs, and I'll do this using a flashlight and a toilet paper roll. And I'll set the egg on top of the toilet paper roll and check for any veining. If the embryo is alive and developing, the first sign will be red spider veining, and I'll show you that in just a minute. But another thing that you might see is just a little tiny embryo in there moving around, and it'll look like a little dark spot, and it'll move around in the egg just a little bit. So in this clip, you could see the embryo moving around in there just a little bit, just floating around. And this has been in the incubator for over a week now. Here's a good example of the spider veins. Now you'll notice on the edge here, there's a darker red ring. Sometimes that could be a sign of the embryo failing, but as long as you still see the little embryo in there moving around, you're good. But if you don't see it moving and all you see is that ring without the spider veins in there, it's probably a dead egg. And this just happens. Sometimes they fail in the middle of the process. So after I've done my first candling, usually about a week after I've set the eggs in the incubator, if I see these signs of life, I'll put a check mark on the egg, and that tells me that they've passed the first check. If I don't see any signs of life, because I put my eggs in here at different times, I'll not put a check on there at all. And then the next time that I check my eggs, which would be in another week, if that egg doesn't have any signs of life, then I know to toss it. So by the time these eggs are ready to hatch, they should have 3 check marks on the egg, and that tells me that all of those eggs were alive during the last check. If you have chickens that lay all types of color eggs, you may have issues candling some. For example, Marins, they might have a really dark shell, and they're really difficult to see through under the light. But I find that the most difficult ones to see are olive eggers. They tend to have more bloom on the egg, and they're just really, really hard to see anything through the egg. So with those eggs, I'll just leave them in the incubator the entire time. I won't even bother checking them if I can't see through them. So like I mentioned earlier, I put eggs in here at different times, and that's because I don't have 50 chickens laying 50 eggs in a day. So some of these will be several days apart. Sometimes I even have them a week apart, and that doesn't cause any issues for me, because by the time my first set needs to go on lockdown or be off the turner, I just leave the turner on. And I've never had issues with chicks getting injured with the turner on when they're hatching at all. I just never have. The turner, the little strips are really close together, so their legs don't really get stuck between the turners. There's a big enough gap for their legs to get out, and it's close enough together to where their heads don't get caught in there or anything like that. So I've never had issues just leaving the turner on. Not to mention, the turner turns very, very slowly when it's activated. You could barely even see it moving, so the chicks have plenty of time to move around if they need to. So because I have eggs hatching at different times in the incubator, I don't put anything on lockdown. So I'm constantly opening the incubator and taking chicks out, even though some of the eggs should be on lockdown. I just don't follow that step. I haven't noticed any difference, and we always get a really high hatch rate. However, it only really takes me 3 to 4 days to get enough eggs to fill up this incubator. So the biggest distance apart that they have in age is maybe 4 days. So I could remove all of these from the turner and just set them into the incubator and not turn them for the last 4 days, and they'll be totally fine. But I just choose to leave the turner on. As far as temperature goes, I pretty much stay right at 99.5. You can go a little higher than that. I think you can go up to 102, but I just keep it right at 99.5. And humidity, they say ideally you want it to be at 50 to 60%. But to be perfectly honest with you guys, I keep mine down to about 35% to 45%. When I start to see pipping on the eggs, indicating that they're starting to hatch, I'll put a wet rag at the bottom of the incubator underneath the tray, and I'll just make sure I keep adding water so that they don't have any issues hatching, and it usually stays right about 45% at that point. I don't try to get it any higher than that. Because I'm monitoring the humidity at this point pretty steadily, I can open the incubator during this time, even though most people will just keep it on lockdown, and I really don't have any issues with chicks drying out or anything like that. But if you're having trouble keeping your humidity up, I would not open the incubator once you start to see chicks hatching. However, I open mine up as soon as they get fluffy and they're ready to be moved to a brooder. So even if there's wet chicks in there or eggs hatching at a different stage, if there's fluffy chicks in there, I'm going to take them out. And I'm really quick about it. I don't leave the lid off or leave it open for a long period of time. So once we move them into the brooder under the heat lamp, or if we're using the cozy cubby wall heater, we just make sure that there's plenty of room in the brooder for them to get away from the heat. That's really important because they will self-regulate by moving closer or further away from your heat source. We also just make sure that we are giving them clean water every day, that we're cleaning out their feeders, and that their brooder is really clean, the floor of their brooder. You don't want too much poo to pile up, and we don't do a deep bed method in our brooders either. We usually just put them on a rubber mat, or we'll have just straight up dirt on the ground. That way if a light bursts or falls, it's not going to catch anything on fire. Sometimes we'll put a really thin layer of pine shavings if the ground is wet, or a really, really, really thin layer of hay, but nothing that is thick enough to really catch fire. Once they're about 3 to 4 weeks old, we move them from the brooder into our chicken tractor, which is what you see here. And we move this tractor every few days, and that keeps them really healthy. It keeps the ground beneath them nice and clean. If it's really cold outside, we'll cover this with a tarp, or we'll just leave them in the brooder a little bit longer. Alright guys, that's it for this video. I hope it inspires you to try hatching chicks for yourself. I just don't want anyone to overthink it too much, because I know the information on the internet can be pretty overwhelming, and I really want to encourage you guys to try hatching for yourself. Thank you guys so much for watching, and we'll see you tomorrow.